Fiends, friends, and familiars. This is Matt Orozco here from Macabre Daily, and I'm joined today by filmmaker Minos Papas, who recently directed and co-wrote Motherwitch, which has just had its world premiere at a sold-out showing for the International Film Festival in Rotterdam, and is heading to the Berlinale European film market in 5 days. Minos hails from Cyprus and has worked across the landscape of film, including as a director, writer, editor, producer, cinematographer, the lighting department, electrical. Your IMDb is littered with expertise across different disciplines. So, Minos, a pleasure to have you with me today, and thank you so much for making the time to talk.
Thank you, Matt. I love that introduction. It's probably one of the best introductions I've had.
Oh well, I'm flattered, but I hope that someone outdoes me because you are certainly worthy of quite a bit of praise, and I will be forthright in saying that I really enjoyed watching Mother Witch. It's a beautiful film, and the first thing I kind of thought of is, and it's it feels like a very cliche question, but I think it's really important in the context of Mother Witch is what were some of the inspirations that you and kind of your co-writers were thinking about when you were coming together for the story around Mother Witch?
Yeah, no, it's a variety. It's sort of a wide swath of inspiration. One is obviously the folklore of Cyprus, which is something that's rarely seen, I think, these days, across the board, not just in film. But it's the folklore. The film is loosely inspired by the Christmas folklore of the Kalikantzari goblins, who are these little creatures that are half child, half beast, with animal characteristics that appear on Christmas Eve, and they continue to wreak havoc throughout the 12 days of Christmas. And in my research on these really interesting creatures, I found that they are, in fact, the spirits of dead children who have come back to haunt their bereaved parents. And they're very mischievous. They can even be murderous. And that inspired me very much thinking about something that interests me in general is this aspect of loss and grief and how a loss or a loved one who has passed on or we've lost them can still be a presence in our lives, right? Um, and this was combined with the experiences of a friend of mine who shared with me her poetry and art that she created after the loss of her first child, which was very eye-opening to me as someone who is not a parent to see how a mother grieves for her child, especially through an artist's lens, but also how society itself looks upon people who have lost a child with a certain amount of stigma, even to this day. So that was basically the main elements of inspiration to Mother Witch, but of course, there's a host of other things, including the landscape and the period that we chose to set the film in.
I think it almost be, and I as a horror movie fan, I say this with full respect. It's almost dismissive to call Mother Witch a horror movie because it has horror elements, but it really is a human story. I put it more in the drama category than anything, but it just has those folklore elements to it. And you are right, like the Cypriot culture doesn't get a lot of representation in film, especially in the West part, in here in the US. And I think that the more exposure we get to different folklore elements across the world, the more it kind of opens us up to realizing like, wow, there's a lot of ideas out there of things that we haven't thought of culturally that are really interesting, but also it helps being as kind of a binding glue between us as cultures to determine, oh, we do share, the idea of Christmas not being this overjoyous holiday and being kind of littered with creatures that can do you harm is not, unique, but it is something that often gets kind of put aside to the more commercial aspects of the holiday. And when you talked about the themes about grief, religion, I picked up on a lot of that, the idea of creation, how people are stigmatized in society, almost kind of sympathy, but almost the toxic sympathy in a way, because there's this sense that you could have done something differently. And I think that shows up in so many of the female characters in the film where, one, the obviously the main character losing her children in a horrific way, but also the woman who has a miscarriage, right? And like the guilt that she carries with her. So I was curious to know a little bit more about, particularly the religion aspect, because there's an emphasis here on these people are religious, but it also is kind of used as a place of comfort, but also a place of punishment.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Christianity is quite austere, it can be
Yeah.
quite autocratic, it's patriarchal. Although there are sort of matriarchal figures in Christianity also. But yeah, the setting is the 12 days of Christmas. Like, in fact, the Greek title is Dodecameron, which is the 12 days of Christmas, which means 12 days. And there is a backdrop of religion here because, as you rightly pointed out, I wanted to have this idea of loss be be parallel to this idea of creation. So we're celebrating Christmas, the arrival of Christ, the birth of Christ, and at the same time, Eleni, the lead character, is confronted with the loss of her children. She's trying to resurrect them, trying to bring them back to life. So yeah, religion really did play that part. Also, there's an interesting allusion to the fact that the Christian religion around Christmas is set at a time of of an older pagan religion. The Saturnalia, the Bacchanalia were all around that period. And there are slight references, like maybe it takes a second viewing to actually see them, but there are slight references to those. The butcher at the beginning says, he's butchering a pig for the Christmas holiday. He takes a piece and he throws it into the pail and says, one for Mother Mary, and then he takes another one and throws it on the roof and says, one for Persephone. And then as my grandmother would say, and then his wife says quickly, don't blaspheme, don't blaspheme. That's blasphemous. But it's there. There are these allusions to paganism as well.
Yeah, and I love that kind of that juxtaposition of, the embracement of one religion at the expense of the degradation of another.
Right.
And I think it speaks to like if we were to layer in the elements of the British rule and kind of that's being put in there as well, because it is a backdrop, but it is also very much a part of the overall story, which is the idea of everyone's under someone's rule. And I think even the father says that to Michael at one point. He's like, someone's above me telling me what to do. So therefore, I have to pass that treatment on to you, not because it's the right thing, but because that's how I'm made to feel. That kind of emphasizes that hurt people hurt other people mentality.
You nailed it. I mean, I couldn't have said it better myself. Like one of the themes of or for me, the theme, because I think a director has to stick to one theme when making a movie. The theme is parenthood, right? And every character in the film is a parent of some kind, some sort. Even the British that you mentioned, who are this colonial force, and they're quite brutal. They're parents. They're bad parents. They're the ones in control over the Cypriot natives. And then you've got the autocratic father, as you said. You've got the mother, who's also very strict, but for different reasons. She's terrified of losing another child. You've got the woman of the village who never had children, right? So she's sort of trying to be a parent in other ways. She's always being so overly nice to the kids in the movie. So parent, and even the donkey herd is like a parent to his donkey Goldie, whom he
Yeah.
loses at some point. So it's parenthood for me was the key theme, and I used that to navigate throughout all the characters.
Yeah, and again, I like yourself, I'm not a parent, so I think the part that, the fact that it resonates so strongly with folks that don't have children, I think is a testament to just the efficacy of the work, which is that it's ubiquitous and universal. And I think that it's a human story. I mean, I have not seen Take Me Home, but I just read this quick synopsis, and I think that's something I'm really interested in because I work with intellectually and developmentally disabled adults on the side through a mentorship program. And so much of what you're telling here is a human story. And I'm wondering kind of where that comes from for yourself. Like, what is it that, because as a filmmaker, you're right, you choose themes. But, those themes don't necessarily have to tether themselves to things in the real world. They can be, supernatural or kind of otherworldly. But in this case, these are very human stories that just use supernatural elements to help emphasize the humanity. And I'm wondering, what is it about your storytelling that wants you to gravitate so much towards that human connection and relationship?
I've always been interested in how we use mythology to create a map or a navigational tool for the inexplicable, and mythology or religion for that matter. And at the same time, the inexplicable can come from very often points of traumatic incidents in our lives. So, in previous films I've made, I've dealt with post-traumatic stress and moral injury, and in veterans, I was really interested in that for a period because it was affecting such a large part of the population in the US. And there was very little understanding towards this population. So I worked with veterans and I studied with them to really, and they allowed me into their experiences, and it was an incredibly eye-opening. I'm really interested in learning things through my films. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And learning what people are going through and why they believe things that they do. So that's really what led me to Motherwitch, as well as, personal reasons such as not being a parent, and that's part of life that I think is really important, and it kind of like closes the cycle for many people. And so when you have that and then you lose it, I mean, it's like practically it's a trauma that you cannot recover from. And I think that was a big part of it as well. I don't like easy resolutions in movies. I don't like movies that sort of end with like, and then they lived happily ever after. It's like, no, that never happens, man.
Yeah, it's not
It's
life.
like, that's not life. Yeah, exactly. And I
Yeah,
think it's a richer experience for the audience too, to experience something that sort of leaves them in a between two worlds, and they can either decide. And Take Me Home actually has a very similar philosophy. Liz Sargent's film, the ending, once you see it, I won't spoil it for you, but like the ending has a very similar sort of ambiguity to it.
and I think there's a place for all this. Like, I think a good, healthy mix of media is a diversity of experience, and kind of some of that is like, sometimes we want something that has immediate closure because we need that in our life. So if I've gone through something really difficult, or me, I need to feel better about something, resolution can be a means for me to kind of cope. Whereas sometimes we want to be left in that ambiguity because life is messy, it's not direct. And all of your characters, even the supernatural ones, they're sympathetic. They may not be good people, right? Like the father, Michael's father is like, he's not a good person, but at the same time, you never treat him like an antagonist because we understand where he's coming from. It may not be what we agree with, but we get that that's how he became the way he is, and that extends across. I think all of the characters. We feel for the children. We feel for, we feel for Eleni, and all of that is we just feel for them differently. Even the goat herder and Goldie. Like there's a very sad moment where he's looking for Goldie and he's dead, and I'm like, this poor guy just wants his goat. And the
Yeah,
other guy's trying to
exactly.
manipulate his neighbor's trying to like manipulate him into selling his goat for money just to pay the British. Like it's all about this subjugation and how community. I also got a sense of community from this is that because we don't know much about Cypriot culture. I think you do a good job of exposing us to it, and even though it's periodically based, I was just captured by the cinematography, and I was curious to know like how you and Jack McDonald work together because I know you have a cinematographer in your own. You've been a DOP in your own right, but there are some absolutely breathtaking moments in this movie that I kind of wish I could see it on a big screen because seeing with the tree in particular is just mind-blowingly captivating. So I'm curious to know more about the landscape shooting and working with Jack on capturing those moments.
Yeah, no, I mean, Jack and I go back to the days when he was a gaffer, and this was our first collaboration as director DP, and it was wonderful. We talked a lot. The other thing about Jack is that he is a painter. Like
Oh,
he paints. He understands that dimension as well, right? So we worked closely together and looked at painting, actually. We looked at other movies and things like that, but painting was really what brought us to a lot of our choices. We explored, various lenses. We shot the film on these vintage lenses, these vintage Soviet lenses from the 1960s, to give it a certain amount of texture. But we decided very quickly not to go for super wide lenses, but to keep lenses sort of medium wide. I think maybe the widest lens we used was a 37 or something, because we wanted to invoke the pastoral painting, landscape painting of the 16th century to the 19th century, that had this feeling of like a very medium width frame. And within that frame, sometimes characters are quite small. So there is this kind of distance or this aspect that you're looking at a frame that's a painting. Of course, having the landscapes of Cyprus in the winter was, very key to that. The palette was green and brown and gray and not the typical Mediterranean blues and gold and yellow sand beaches or whatever. Um, but also another thing we tried to do is I always wanted the camera placed where paintings are. So you very often see in the movie the point of view of a painting.
Yep.
Eleni's working on something and she's literally looking at the audience and then lifting her brush, and then we flip around and see her point of view of the painting. But the shot of her painting is the painting's point of view. So wherever there's a painting, we give the painting's point of view. It's like art is alive. Art is a character, you know? So these choices were really, really key and things that Jack and I discussed, as well as the kind of obvious things like lighting with firelight, and keeping a very dark night, realistic night. So our moonlight was always very subdued. It wasn't this like wash of blue that sometimes you see in
Yeah.
movies.
I mean, it very much brought to mind the Barry Lyndon approach to filmmaking, which is how can we set this up as naturally as possible so that it meets this explicit moment that we're getting. And I also think that it's fascinating to hear about the painting focus because it makes a lot of sense. Even in the most grandest shots that you have, like there's a particular shot of the hills near the end of the film where there's like little crucifixes kind of sticking out of the landscape. And even though
Yeah.
it tended to be a grand look at a much bigger area, it still feels very intimate and close to it, so that you never feel miniature in its in comparison to it. And the idea of blending history and fiction together, I think, is such a fascinating thing to do because it muddies the waters a little bit of what's happened, but it also adds to this really rich storytelling that doesn't keep us beholden to fact, which can be sometimes boring, right? It's not always as interesting as fiction. So, how much research did you did go into creating this environment, and then how did you make a decision between where do we stretch the elements of folklore and mythology into the reality, and where do we keep it more bound to the to the terrestrial?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question. I'm glad you brought that up because I believe that in order for the audience to suspend their disbelief and like really believe a movie, really get into a movie, it's got to feel real. It's got to feel tangible, you know? So I wanted this rooted in historical accuracy as much as possible, as much as we could do in our tiny budget. Um, but we did a lot of research. There's an incredible archive of photography from a Scottish photographer called John Thompson, and he came to Cyprus in 1878. And he took this, he has a series of these silver plates that he shot of just like normal people. He's got beggars, he's got priests, he's got villagers working, he's got houses. And we use this as our Bible, really, to not just for the cinematography, but for the production design as well. It was a time in Cyprus where the Ottoman Empire had left Cyprus in a complete disarray. The Ottomans were bankrupt, and they had just given over Cyprus to the British, who came in and were like, "Oh wow, this place is a wreck. We've got to rebuild everything." So they immediately took all the locals and started building. So it creates this interesting dynamic. You've got the English who are there in their red coats, completely out of place, sweating even in the winter, and they're the only ones that are kind of like pop in this. They're pale and they're like in these red coats. Um, and we filmed in a 15th century village, so which is abandoned now. So what you see are not sets. They're a
Wow.
real village that was built in the 15th century, and we added to it, added certain elements, fixed the doors, added some furniture, obviously dressed a few interiors, like four or five interiors to create um, the homes. But those are real locations, and that's what I think really helps bring the film to life and that period to life, that period of 1882.
Yeah, I mean the authenticity, I think, just feels immediate, and you are immersed almost in the moment. Like the second the film starts, you're in that moment. You don't have to build towards it. There's no introduction. I think that helps with understanding, Cypriot culture and also what was happening in that period of time. And it's the kind of thing, the best thing a movie can do in some cases is cause more curiosity. And so the first thing I thought when I was preparing this interview is like, all right, I know I'm not gonna be able to cram in all this Cypriot history before then, but at least got to understand some basic things so I don't sound like a fool in this conversation. And my last question for you, Minos, is just really more about the broader kind of intention of what is it you want the world to know about Cypriot culture through this film? Because as we started with, it's such a part that I don't think gets a lot of exposure. And ignorantly, of course, I say here that I just don't know much about it. I don't think a lot of people in the U.S. in particular do. So, what's something that you want people to take away from this, and what's maybe the best outcome as far as how people view this in terms of relation to Cyprus?
Well, what you said earlier about this being a genre piece, but also being a drama and being like it's a universal story. And I think that's really the key of what I want people to take away from it is the universal ex is the experience of loss and, kind of redemption or championing creation over destruction and over loss. Um, But if I was to speak specifically about Cyprus, it would be the fact that we are an island. We are a very, very small island country that over the centuries has been invaded and dominated by so many different cultures, and we've absorbed from everyone the ancient Greeks, the Egyptians, the Phoenicians, the Saracens, the Macedonian Greeks, and then later the Louisianians, the French, the Franks, the Italians, the Richard the Lionheart was there. Like we've absorbed so much from all these cultures, the Ottomans, obviously, and it's in our identity, it's in the landscape. And I think that's something I wanted to introduce to audiences worldwide. Unfortunately, the audiences won't be able to literally understand the language that's being spoken, but we did a very big historical research on the language because we speak a dialect of Greek and Turkish in Cyprus. But the dialect of Greek that we use in the movie had to be really distilled to what was being spoken in the 19th century.
Right.
So I think audiences may be surprised. They'll hear some Italian words or some French words in there too, we've tried to preserve that in the subtitles also. But I think this aspect, this window, this little taste into a new world maybe will help, allure audiences, invite audiences to experience Cyprus for themselves.
Yeah, and hopefully it continues to bring us films that are from this folklore, because I think the one thing again when you learn about folklore mythology, if you're interested in that kind of thing, it almost becomes this never-ending cycle of things you can get and take advantage of. I mean, when I remember learning about yokai and like Japanese culture, I'm like, oh, this is amazing. So I bought a book on yokai, and then I'm like, wait, there's Chinese mythology too. Let's read about that. So I think there's just so much richness for those that are curious here. And Minos, I really appreciate your time and your candor on this call today. It's been a fantastic discussion, and want to remind everyone that Motherwitch, I'm assuming you're still looking for distribution, or do we have any distribution plans to share?
There are no set distribution plans, but I'm pretty sure we'll have distribution closer to the summer or the fall. But we're going to be in the festival circuit, so chances are we'll be at a festival near you very soon.
Well, I hope so. And again, it would be amazing if this could get picked up and then released right before Christmas, because I think that would just really sing naturally
Right.
into the themes you're going with. But
Yeah.
for those watching that are in charge of those decisions, make sure you catch Mother Witch. If you're going to be at the Berlinale Festival in 5 days, you'll have your premiere there. So, Minos, I wish you all of the best in these festivals you're going through, and looking forward to not just news on distribution, but also looking into some of your other films as well. So, thank you so much for your time.
Really appreciate the chat, Matt. It was really great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Minos.